Hello everyone, my name is Michael Stolberger. I'm Director of Elections for Blue Earth County. In that capacity, I'm the Director of the Property and Environmental Resources Department, and I am going to go through the training that we built and provided earlier today for our election clerks throughout the county. Our intention was to record the entire presentation from start to finish. We had some technical issues, so I am re-recording the first portions of it to be matched up with the end session. And this will allow folks to review the training at home or participate in that training to get certification hours if they were not able to do so earlier today. We started out the training with some introductions of everyone who was in the room, so we will obviously skip that part for this re-recording. But we also provided some additional information, and all of this information will be made available to our clerks via our website or through email so that you can print off it and review it at your as needed, and then also just have you have the ability to review it as a resource throughout the election cycle. One of the documents that we did provide was a templated resolution. We're using new equipment for the 2020 election, starting with the August primary and continuing forward. And so we are requesting or recommending that councils and township boards act to approve the use of that equipment. It's not required, and it is something that we would just like to have done prior to the election. So there's a templated resolution that folks can use for that, and then on the back side is something of that form is something that we would really like to have our clerks help us out with, and it is just a public informational sheet about the new equipment and making sure that voters understand how to work, what it is used for prior to the election. So again, that material will be made available on our website. We'll share that information with everybody. And as I said, the other resources that will be out there will be a PDF copy of the presentation slides that we're going to be working through here in just a bit. So as I said, I hope as we work through this material, it'll be helpful for everyone. If there are any questions outside of the material as you reviewed it, feel free to email us and let us know of those questions. And we'll be happy to answer them to the best of our abilities. Otherwise, like I said, we'll just work through these few sections here and have that count as our elections clerk training for anybody who would need it. So what I'm going to do right now is switch over to the slides and we'll work through that material. Alrighty, at this time everybody should be seeing the slides on my screen, and we'll just go through these much like we did with the entire group earlier today. So as has been mentioned numerous times now, this is the election clerk training for Blue Earth County clerks for the 2020 election cycle. This will work towards the certification requirements for our clerks, which is required by state law. We talk later about those requirements and the number of hours that are required. This will get us 2 of those hours, and we'll be able to work forward from there with that. It is going to cover many topics, including what's new, some of the new laws that we need to address, and it's also going to talk about some of the processes and procedures that we'll be looking at handling. I will also spend a fair amount of time talking about the calendar for 2020, as well as the important dates off of that calendar that every clerk should be aware of. And then we will spend some time at the end talking about COVID-19, the coronavirus, and what that may do and the impacts that might have on our elections activities. In my introduction there, I did mention that we went through introductions across the room and included everybody who was on the phone to just get a handle on the number of folks that were participating. Clearly we won't have to do that as we do this re-recording here. However, I do want to point out that if you need to get a hold of myself or Christy Mays, who's our programs coordinator for elections, you can get a hold of us via phone. Numbers are listed there on the screen for you, or our email account is our best bet there. Most emails usually come through the bec.elections@blueearthcountymn.gov email box. That hits all of our folks, but if you do need to address either of us separately, that is totally fine. We do want to make sure that you know that sometimes email gets a little bogged up with us though, so if you need some immediate assistance, you'll want to call the elections line. That's 507-304-4341. We always do our best to respond as soon as we can. Alrighty, so to actually break down the training plan for you today, most of the information that we need to cover is required by state law. And so we're going to make sure we hit those pieces for you and then add in some additional information that's really applicable to Blue Earth County specifically. And when we talk about the things that need to be provided in this training, we are required to update you on the laws and the rules that have changed since the last election cycle. There has been some changes there, and we'll spend some time talking through there. But we will spend more time just talking about the processes and the policies that are going to be applied for the 2020 election to make sure everybody is comfortable with what's going on with that and staying up to date on that. We'll also work in a break, which we obviously won't do in this recording, but you'll see that that's a break in the presentation slides that we'll be working with today. And then in the recording segments that you'll be able to review as you wish. And then after that break, we do dive into the election judge training, some information about mail balloting, and also spend a little bit more time talking about our equipment. Then we jump into the elections calendar. I provide the most important dates in the elections calendar slides. However, you want to make sure you're following the elections calendar that's specific to you as a township clerk or a school district clerk or a city clerk for elections, as it's much more comprehensive and covers all of the pieces that you need to cover. Lastly, we talk about COVID-19 and what some of those changes are going to look like in our polling places, as well as for our early voters, really. So that's what we've got laid out for the materials for today. So let's actually jump into that. What's new in terms of laws and rules? Really, to make it more meaningful for you to understand the laws and rules that we operate under, we need to step back and look at the structure of elections in the state of Minnesota. So first off, the Secretary of State is our chief elections official. Secretary Simon has been in that capacity for several years now. And he prides himself and his elections team on doing as good a job as they can to provide guidance and direction to us as elections administrators. However, that guidance and direction needs to be rooted in laws or in decisions by the courts. And those are the two pieces that set the framework for us from an elections administration perspective. The legislature passes the laws, and the elections must be administered in compliance in accordance to those laws, unless the courts would rule that something is unconstitutional or is unfair or inappropriately or unjust in its application. And so we do have a couple of instances where the courts have agreed to some decisions that have changed laws that have been created by the legislature. We'll get into those in more detail in just a bit. When we also talk about how some of those rules and laws come to be, the Secretary of State does have a role, though. So not only does he enforce that and implement that, he does have the ability to weigh in on some of the things that the legislature has granted him authority to review and to weigh in on. When we get past that, though, and look at the framework that we're operating under for elections, we do have to remember that elections are a local activity. And what I mean by that is the city, the township, or the school district is responsible for administering the elections within their communities or in their precincts. And we do that under guidance and direction from the counties. And then we share some responsibilities between the county and the city or the township or the school. And so this slide illustrates some of those pieces there for you. Blue Earth County is responsible for training all clerks, and then we also do provide the training for our election judges rather than training you as trainers for that. We're also required to do a lot of the paperwork and administrative work there, providing you with voter information, providing you with registration applications, completing the registration process for voters to make sure that they're updated in our systems. We are also responsible for administering the absentee voting process, and we're responsible for that because we have not delegated that authority to some of our cities like other counties have done. We also have responsibility for our mail ballot voters. Clerks, on the other hand, are responsible for following the elections calendar and the elections guides. Those are great resources. They're available on the Secretary of State's website. If you go out to the Secretary of State's website for the state of Minnesota and do a search for election guide, you'll find them, and they're specific to the type of jurisdiction that you're operating in. You're also responsible for administering your local election, and that looks different if you're a live polling place or if you're a mail ballot polling place. You have just different levels of involvement in administering the elections. However, across any of our elections, the clerk is responsible for accepting candidate filings, and we'll spend a fair amount of time talking about that, and certifying the elections results through your boards or councils. You are also responsible for hiring your election judges if you are operating a polling place on election day. And as we've talked about already, you are required for the training to receive your certification as an elections clerk in the state of Minnesota. Okay. So let's jump into some of those new laws or more recently changed laws or rules based on current statute as well as our rulings from some courts. So first off, it's really confusing in this election cycle because everything is going to feel new or at least have a new perspective as a response to the coronavirus. The reason that things are going to be new is because we have special laws that have been passed for 2020. But we also have had the court make some rulings that will apply to our 2020 elections, at least the August primary. So let's start at the beginning with this. And so candidate filing. As a municipal clerk and in response to COVID, we do have to have the ability for candidates to file with you in a remote fashion. And what we mean by that is we need to have the ability for a candidate who doesn't feel safe or is not able to enter your administrative office to file for their contest or the candidacy that they want to file. They have to be able to do that either via email or via mail or through a drop box at your door or some sort of fashion like that to allow them to do that in a manner where they feel safer. All the other rules still apply. We still have to have the candidate filing no later than 5 p.m. on the last day of filing. We have to have our filing fee. The form has to be completed correctly. There has to be a witness or notary public on that candidate filing application or affidavit. So all those rules still apply. We just have to have a remote option for them in order to complete that process. For Blue Earth County, we did that as simply as having an ability to submit it via scan and email. And then we collect payment electronically. And to be honest with you, the electronic payment part is going to be the hardest part for you, especially when your filing fees are only $2. But what you might want to do in that regard is have some sort of a drop box available or allow them to mail in a check. Just remember it needs to be received no later than 5 p.m. on the last day of the filing period. Other than candidate filing, we also have a change related to the processing of absentee ballots as a response to COVID. We now have 14 days to process those ballots once they've been returned to us, and that used to be a 7-day window. But because of the expected uptick in the amount of folks voting by mail, voting from home, voting early, the legislature said we have additional time for the 2020 elections only. So now instead of starting 7 days before the election in processing, we can start at 14 days before the election. That has a consequence for our voters because once we start opening and processing ballots, the ballots can no longer be clawed back or rescinded by the voter, meaning that in some instances, if a voter had a change of heart and wants to change his ballot, he used to have up to 7 days before the election to do that. Now it has to be done 14 days prior if we're going to start opening sooner, which the county will be doing. We also have some flexibility to process ballots after the election day, and that'll become more meaningful when I talk about a recent court decision a little bit later on this slide. We also have moved some polling places due to the coronavirus. Most of the moves have occurred in the city of Mankato, where we relocated polling places to have them be in a place that has more readily accessible hallways for people to queue in, more in and outdoors, larger spaces to spread voters, that sort of thing. In Mankato, we went from 15 polling places down to 7 for this election series. And then we also had changes in polling places in the city of Mapleton and in the city of Lake Crystal. They've found new locations to conduct their elections to be a little bit more safer in response to COVID-19. Voters are notified of those polling place changes. They're notified prior to the election to let them know where they are now voting, and then we're also doing outreach to make sure that folks are getting all the information that they might need in order to be ready for their election. We also have some changes related to polling places from the perspective that we had several precincts go mail ballot. Several of our townships decided that voting by mail at home was a safer alternative for 2020 at least. And so by default, their polling places have changed, and those voters would now come to the courthouse if they did not want to vote the ballot that was automatically mailed to them. An additional change we had is tied to healthcare facility voting. In previous elections, we are required to provide healthcare facility outreach, meaning that we bring the polling place to the nursing homes for folks that reside there to vote more conveniently and comfortably from their facility. Due to the COVID-19 virus, the legislature does not want us to be in those polling places with election judges, and so we will be providing training to healthcare facilities staffers so that they can assist voters in the voting process. That training will look very similar to what we did for election judges. It just makes them prepared to help with that absentee voting process, which is essentially what it is. Any voters residing in nursing homes or hospitals or other long-term care environments can also just request a ballot be mailed to them and have that be an alternative to the healthcare facility voting option. We'll be working with our nursing homes in Mankato as well as in South Bend Township and the city of Mapleton to make sure that their healthcare facilities know about that option and working through that training as required or necessary. All right, I also did want to touch on funding. We did have a question come in regarding COVID-19 and if there were going to be any dollars available to help cover the cost associated with cleaning supplies, anything like that. Later on in the presentation, we'll talk about the materials that are actually being provided by the state and by the county to help in that regard. But there is some funding that's also being made available. That funding is actually going to be provided in a block grant fashion. And what that means is that there was a large pool of money that was made available at the state level. And those funds came from the federal government. They were passed on to the state. The state is withholding a portion of that funding, about 40% of it, to be used at the state level to provide resources and information and help with the election at that statewide broader level. And then the remaining 60% was to be shared at the county level to then be further allocated to our cities and townships that are conducting elections in 2020. So after working through to that longer formula, we do get about $51,000 allocated to Blue Earth County for the election. And then the formula also says how we should divide that with our cities and towns that are conducting elections. That is just a suggestion. If we need to change that at all, we are able to do that amongst the cities and towns and counties. However, the formula allocates approximately $23,000 of our $51,000 to the cities and towns that are conducting elections on the election days. The remaining money stays at the county to process mail ballots and take care of that absentee voting process. But so for our live cities and townships that we have in 2020, here are some estimates of the amounts that could be allocated. Think of these as supplementary funds to add on to anything that the county is not already providing or that the state isn't already providing in terms of COVID equipment. And we'll talk about what all that equipment looks like later on in the presentation. But anyways, the breakdowns of the funding, the estimates that we have would be Decoria receiving about $700, Eagle Lake approximately $1,100, Lake Crystal approximately $1,000, Luray Township $600 approximately, Madison Lake $700 as an estimate. Mankato City is going to get the majority of that money based on the formula of $16,600. Mapleton City $800 approximately, an estimated $700 for Rapidan Township. South Bend an estimated $700, and St. Clair has an estimated $500 supplemental fund available for COVID-19 related expenses as a result of the election. There'll be more information about that. It's actually administered, as I said, as a grant through the county, and so we'll have more details on that we'll share with folks as we have it available. Again, those are additional funds. Lots of materials will be provided by the county or the state in terms of cleaning supplies, face shields, face masks, and other additional resources like that, pens and things like that we'll talk about later on in this presentation. I also wanted to make sure that everybody received their P&P reimbursements if they were expecting one after submitting for reimbursement for the March election. That applies only to our live precincts and cities and townships. the mail ballot precincts were reimbursed through the county we submitted on their behalf, since the costs were at the county level. Two other changes that we need to talk about very briefly are related to recent lawsuits or decision settlements regarding lawsuits, and they are subject to change yet, so it's important that we make a note of that and make sure folks understand those pieces. The first one that I want to mention is voter assistance. So we've talked about this numerous times for returning elections clerks or election judges, but if somebody was assisting a voter by filling in the ovals on a ballot, that was restricted to 3 instances. So somebody could assist 3 voters in filling in their ballots. There was a court case in Ramsey County where it was argued that that was unconstitutional and that it was violating folks' ability to vote and the Voter Rights Act because they would have had limits placed on them in terms of the assistance that they could have in completing the act of voting. And so the court decision says now that any number of voters can be assisted in the polling place by folks that are providing assistance. So essentially what we want to think about is that the voter now can be assisted by anybody except for their employer or their union, meaning that the candidate can assist in some fashions, and that there is no longer a limit to the number of instances or voters that can be assisted in that process. So let me say that one more time. We used to have a 3-person limit in terms of providing assistance in completing the voting process. That has been removed, and we've also removed the requirement for who can provide assistance, with the only exceptions now, meaning the only people who can't provide assistance is the employer of that voter or a union representing that employer. All right, and then the other very recent lawsuit or settlement that we had come our way was tied to the witness requirement and the postmark date associated with our ballots that are being returned to us via mail. So that would be our absentee ballots, our early voting, and our mail ballots. And this only applies to registered voters. And what it tells us is that the witness requirement is no longer required for a registered voter. And the reason for that is the lawsuit said that it was not fair to somebody who might be in a vulnerable population or not comfortable entering a polling place in light of COVID-19 to require them to interact with another individual to serve as a witness. That was just as dangerous for their health and well-being as going into the polling place. And so the Secretary of State's office reached a settlement with the petitioners of that lawsuit to say that a witness was not required for registered voters. Non-registered voters still have to have a witness because that witness has to attest that the proof of residency was established for that non-registered voter. So again, the witness requirement is only removed for the registered voters or registered mail ballot voters. The other change resulting from the settlement for that lawsuit was the postmark date. This is going to be a big change for voters because they're so used to understanding that the ballot must be received in the office no later than Election Day. Now what this settlement tells us is that the ballot must be postmarked no later than Election Day, but it can be received by the county as of close of business 2 days after the election. And so close of business August 13th, as long as it was postmarked no later than August 11th, that ballot will still be counted. The big deal for this, the hardest piece for this that we have to be very comfortable and ready for, is that we are so used to having election results on the night of election, and because of this settlement, that is not going to be possible. We're not able to release results until they're complete. And so if we're still waiting for mail to be returned to us the next day or the day following, we won't have complete results. So that's going to cause some folks some concern as they're waiting for results to come in. The Secretary of State is trying to work through some changes to that, and that may be addressed in some fashion where we'll be able to release unofficial incomplete results, but as of right now, we're not able to do that. Again, both of those pieces are subject to change. And I also want to make sure it's understood that that is right now only applying to the August 2020 primary. And so that is going to add another wrinkle for that because we're going to have voters who are going to learn a new process for August that may not exist in November. What we're telling everybody to do is to follow the instructions very closely that they're provided in their ballot packets. If they have a different date that applies to them, there's stickers applied, there's information and instructions that they can be using to make sure that they understand what's going on. And then also we are reminding voters when they're calling in that even though the witness requirement isn't an actual requirement anymore, that having a witness is not going to cause the ballot to be rejected. So if people want to be safe and they don't feel uncomfortable having a witness, they can do that. It just provides that option to not have a witness. And we're also still encouraging folks to return their ballots early enough, since while the postmark may guarantee them some extra days, the ballot still has to be received, and that's not always a guarantee with some of the postal changes that we see. Okay, additional changes that we want to talk about real quickly for you. These are changes that are carrying forward from other legislative sessions and other election cycles, but for new clerks, it's a good reminder. Remember, direct balloting does exist, so 7 days prior to the election, a voter can come into our offices and cast a ballot and feed it into a machine. It gets tabulated only to the sense that it checks to make sure that it is a ballot that has been completed correctly, meaning no crossover votes, no overvotes, anything like that. It is not tabulated from the sense that we know what results are throughout that 7-day period. It just gives folks the assurance that their ballot is actually being received and will be counted in the election results. That is 7 days prior to the election. That is in conflict with the 14 days that we can process the ballot. So we are working through a hopeful change there where we'll be able to allow folks to start feeding the ballot 14 days prior to the election. And the reason we would like that change to occur is it seems unsafe and quite inefficient to have somebody use an envelope, lick an envelope, hand that envelope to us so that we can turn around and start processing that in the next room 5 minutes later. Just seems awfully wasteful and dangerous if we're trying to not pass papers and pass germs around. But as of right now, it's 7 days. Remember, your emergency elections plans need to be up to date. Most cities and townships have adopted our county-wide plan. We've incorporated all of our cities and townships into that. If that is going to change and you want to have your own emergency elections plan, that's fine. You just need to make sure you're keeping it up to date. Also a reminder that election judges, the party affiliation for election judges, is public information in the polling place on election day only, and only for the election judges working in that polling place, and only for use of election activities. So while we have to collect that information from folks, or they have to declare themselves as not affiliated, we remind them that it'll be shared in a very limited fashion, only to conduct election activities, and other than that, it's not made available. Reminder that we do have to conceal our challenge status on our rosters. That's an important step of the process to make sure that that stays private. However, now that we're implementing poll pads throughout the county and all of our live precincts, that becomes much, much easier. We don't have to worry about that process any longer for us. But I want to just make sure that we know that that challenge status is a private status and not to be shared with other voters. We also have a note there that as of December 31st, we have to designate polling places. The polling places get designated every year. If there's no changes, you can just redesignate your existing locations. And it's also a good time to remind our school districts that if you're using combined polling places, which many folks are for their special elections, if they have any special elections, those combined locations have to be pre-existing polling places that are used on election days by the county, the cities, or the townships. With some of the changes we've had here for 2020 elections, especially in Mapleton or Lake Crystal and in Mankato, we'll want to have conversations with the school district clerks before your December 31 designations, just to see whether or not those changes are being kept, or if you can revert back to your other polling places. Okay. So let's actually talk through one last piece here. This is a friendly reminder for you. Campaigning is not allowed in the polling place, but political activities are allowed in the polling place. Remember, that was a Supreme Court decision from a couple of years ago, and the difference is pretty fine. It's hard to distinguish, but we'll do our best with that. Remember, campaigning is when somebody is expressing an opinion or of support or dislike for a candidate who's on the ballot, a party that's on the ballot, or a contest that's on the ballot. That's considered campaigning, and it's not allowed in the polling place, whereas political activities is free speech, and so that would be acceptable. Examples for you would be somebody wearing a guns right shirt in the polling place. Since that's not a candidate, a question, or a party on the ballot, that's acceptable. However, if somebody has a shirt that says legalize marijuana now, that's not allowed because the legal marijuana party is on the ballot for the August primary. Remember, we ask folks to remove that piece of clothing, cover it up, but in the end of the day, if they refuse to do so, they're still entitled to vote. So we just do our best to work through that. Okay. What I'm going to do is actually pause the presentation right now just to start a second version of the recordings, and then we'll jump right back into our next step, which will be processes and policies.